Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is David Smith. I'm the lay member for Merton CCG, but I'm also acting as the convener for the meeting this morning. So this is a meeting of the 6 South West London CCGs. We meet as a committee in common. Just some practical announcements first. In terms of fire, there isn't a scheduled fire test for today. The exits are very well marked through this building. The restrooms, I think you've seen them, but they're straight outside as you come in. There's a glossary available if we get into too much jargon that people don't understand, so that is available. In terms of this meeting, so the CCGs have been meeting for some time as a committee in order that we can make decisions together as the 6 CCGs. But we are moving into a single CCG for South West London. So what I will do this morning as the convener, I'm going to do we'll do a round robin in a minute to just go around the table so people can introduce themselves. I'll do the declarations of interest and then the minutes of the last committee. And then I will formally hand over to Dr. Andrew Murray, who's been appointed as the chair designate for the new South West London CCG. I'm doing that because the majority of the business this morning relates to the new CCG going forward. So we will handle the meeting that way. So shall we do, if we just run round the table so people can introduce themselves? It would just be helpful to say who you are and what your current role is and your new role in relation to the South West London CCG. So I'll start with myself. So I'm currently the finance chair of Merton CCG. I'm also the audit chair of Sutton CCG. And in the new South West London CCG, I'll be the chair of the finance committee. So I'll go to my left to Andrew Murray.
Thank you, David. So Dr. Andrew Murray, I'm currently the chair of Merton CCG and I will be the chair of the new South West London CCG.
So I'm Sarah Blow. I'm currently the accountable officer for the 6 CCGs in South West London, and I will be the South West London CCG accountable officer. For the purposes of this meeting, I am the managerial representative from Croydon CCG.
I'm Nicola Jones. I'm a GP and chair of Wandsworth CCG, and in the new world I will be the chair of the borough committee in Wandsworth, and also on the South West London board, the clinical vice chair.
I'm Dino Pardinani. I'm a Sutton GP and currently joint clinical director of Sutton CCG and clinical vice chair. In the new world, my role has yet to be determined, but I look forward to hopefully participating.
Hello, I'm Pippa Barber, the independent nurse for Sutton CCG, and in the new organisation I'll be the independent nurse for South West London.
Hello, I'm Lucy Waters. I'm the Managing Director of Sutton CCG, and in the new world I'll be the Locality Executive Director for the NHS Sutton Borough.
Ben Luscombe, I'm currently Chief of Staff for the South West London Alliance CCGs, and I'll be the Chief of Staff for the new CCG as well.
I'm Karen Broughton. I'm Director of Strategy and Transformation for the South West London Health and Care Partnership, and in the new CCG I'll be Director of Strategy and Transformation.
Hi, good morning. I'm Asiya Yunus. I'm a GP in Camden, and I'm here today representing the GPs in Merton, Sutton and Wandsworth as the Medical Director at London-wide LMCs, and moving forward I'll be in the same role as well.
Morning, I'm Patrick Gibson. I'm Shadow GP Lead for Richmond Borough, shadowing Graham, who will introduce himself in a minute.
My name's Caroline Morris. I'm Director of Collaborative Commissioning for South West London Alliance at the moment, and will be Director of Collaborative Commissioning for the CCG.
I'm Nikki Williams. I'm a GP in Wandsworth, and I'm here to present the assisted conception paper and the ECI paper. I don't know what my role will be in the new CCG.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Bates. I'm currently Director of Commissioning Operations for the South West London CCGs, and I will be the Executive Director of Planning, Performance and Delivery in the new role come the 1st of April.
Morning, everybody. My name is Matthew Kershaw. I'm the Chief Executive of Croydon Health Services and also Place-Based Leader for Health at this point. And going forward, I will be the Place-Based Leader for Health representing Croydon on the South West London CCG.
Good morning. My name is James Blythe. I'm Managing Director of Merton and Wandsworth CCGs. Going forward, I'll be Locality Executive Director for Merton and Wandsworth CCG boroughs within the South West London CCG.
Good morning. I'm Les Ross. I'm the Secondary Care Doctor for Croydon CCG at present, and will be moving to Secondary Care Doctor for the South West London CCG.
Good morning. I'm Vishali Shetty. Presently, I'm a GP in Croydon and a Croydon CCG governing body member. And moving forward, I'll be the Clinical Senior Responsible Officer for Mental Health in Croydon.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Gallagher. I'm currently the lay member and audit committee chair for Richmond and Kingston CCGs. And going forward in the new organisation, I'll be the audit chair lay member across the whole of South West London.
Hi, my name is Naz Giovanni. I'm Kingston CCG chair currently. From the 1st of April, I will be the chair of the Borough Committee and a governing body member on the South West London governing body.
Hello, I'm Tony Michaelides. I'm the Managing Director of Kingston and Richmond CCGs, and I will be the Locality Executive Director for Kingston and Richmond going forward.
Good morning, my name is Graham Lewis. I'm a GP in Richmond and currently Richmond CCG Chair. As from April the 1st, I will be a GP in Richmond. And Patrick will be taking over the clinical leadership of Richmond Richmond Borough.
James Murray, I'm CFO, Chief Financial Officer for South West London CCGs, and in traditional accountant boring predictability, I'll be Chief Financial Officer in the new organisation as well.
Thank you all for doing that. That was quite a mouthful for everyone to get through, and maybe we should have a prize for the longest title. But thank you for doing that. Can I just ask people in the colleagues in the audience? Let's just say who you are. It's just nice that everyone gets to know who's in the audience. So should we start over there?
Good morning. I'm Ash Paul. I'm Consultant in Public Health and I work for the PCI and IFR program in South West London.
Hello, I'm Zoe Zambo. I work on the assisted conception treatment policy and the ECI policy.
Hello, I'm Helen West. I'm a pharmaceutical representative from Reeds Agreement.
Good morning. I'm Councillor Anita Sharper. I'm Chair of South West London Scrutiny Committee and Chair of Health Overview Panel at Kingston and Mental Health Champion for the Borough. Thank you.
I'm Mark Foster. I'm from Croydon Health Services Communications Team.
Stephanie Kendrick, Croydon CCG Comms. Lizzie McCall, Head of Communications, South West London and Croydon.
And hello, my name is Max Limbry. I'm a clinical representative from compliance.
Vinny Charnell, South West London Healthcare Partnership, Governance Lead. I'm Lisa Lovelock. I'm PA to the CFO supporting today.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the business. So, declarations of interest which are in the papers. Has anyone got, just to check that those are a correct record? Yes, just looking around the table. Matthew?
Yeah, I should declare an interest around the assisted conception policy in that Croydon Health Services may be going forward one of the providers involved in that service when it comes back to Croydon, depending upon the decision today.
Thank you, Matthew. We'll record that. And any other declarations that aren't recorded? Okay, thank you. And then item 3 is the minutes of the last committee, which was held on the 26th of September. They have been circulated previously. They're here for approval. Can I look around the room to the colleagues happy to approve these minutes? I'm seeing nods, yes. Okay, so we'll approve the minutes. There aren't any matters arising, but I'll just check. Is there anything anyone wants to raise from those previous minutes? No? Okay, so we'll record no matters arising. At which point, my role as the convener can now finish, and I will formally hand over to Andrew Murray as the chair designate of the new South West London CCG. And then for the remainder of this meeting, I'm here with my Merton CCG hat on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. So the first thing I'm going to do as chair is change the order of the agenda. So we are going to go straight into item 6, which is the South West London designate chair, which is myself, and the accountable officer, Sarah, our updates. So we'll start with that, and then we'll go on to item 4. So you've had a written update from us, but I wanted to just quickly talk through that and then say something about ways of working going forward as we create the new South West London CCG. So obviously we are meeting formally as committees in common, but it was an opportunity for us to start to test out what a new South West London CCG governing body would look like, and to start to function like that. So that's the purpose for us convening the meeting as we have, and for me taking over the chair of the meeting at this point. In terms of the creation of the new South West London CCG, we have made a number of appointments, and it's probably worth me just quickly running through what the makeup of the new South West London CCG governing body is going to be, because you've got a few of the appointments in the update, but it's not comprehensive. Obviously, people who are here have been able to call out what their role will be in the new world, but I'll just go through it methodically. So we've got GP representatives on the governing body from each of the 6 boroughs. So I will be the chair of South West London CCG, which means we now have a new borough chair taking over from Merton, which is going to be Dr. Vasanana Pragasam, who isn't here today. In Richmond, Patrick Gibson is going to be taking over as chair. We have Jeff Croucher for Sutton, who isn't here today, and then there's Naz Giovanni, Nicola Jones, who are here, and Agnello Fernandez, who isn't here today as well. So they will be the GPs on the governing body. David is going to be in charge of finance, so the lay member for finance. Les, you've already called out your role as secondary care doctor. Pippa as independent nurse. Paul doing audits, and then Susan Gibbon, who isn't here today, will be the lay member for PPI. We've then got the executive team, so Sarah as accountable officer and James Murray as chief finance officer, and then we expect to have regular attendees from the senior management team, a number of whom are here today. So Karen Broughton looking at strategy and transformation, Jonathan Bates looking at planning and performance. Charlotte Gorn, who's not here, will be leading on communication and engagement. Ben Luscombe as Chief of Staff. And we will have a Chief Nurse and Director of Quality as well, which we are due to appoint to. We then have the executive locality directors, so Tonya Michaelidis from Kingston, James Blythe, Kingston and Richmond, James Blythe from Merton and Wandsworth, Lucy Waters for Sutton, and Matthew Kershaw for Croydon as place-based lead for Croydon. And then we will have some external people on the governing body as well. So Asya Yunus is here for London-wide LMCs, who will attend the governing body meetings, and we will also have Julius Parker representing Surrey and Sussex LMCs, because 3 of our boroughs fall under Surrey and Sussex and 3 fall under London-wide local medical committees. And then we are also going to have a representative from Health Watch, someone representing the voluntary sector, and a director of public health and a director of adult social services. And they are going to be suggested to us by the chief execs of the different local authorities, so we're waiting to work out who that's going to be. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of what the future governing body will look like. It will look a bit like this, but probably slightly more people. The other thing in my update is just to mention the appointment of a new chair to the Health and Care Partnership. So we've appointed Millie Banerjee to become the chair of the Health and Care Partnership for South West London. So that's a really strong appointment, and she will be one of 5 across London, which will really strengthen our joint working, I think. So I did just want to say something about ways of working, as this being really the first time we get together as a new South West London CCG, albeit in shadow form. So I I was cycling here this morning in the rain, and I set off not really knowing where I was going. I was trying to follow my iPhone in the rain on a bike, which was a bit of a challenge. But as I started to make my way here, I realised it was a familiar route to me because I travelled this cycle route just before Christmas when I was coming to Tolworth Girls' School, which is not too far from here, because I was visiting all the different schools in southwest London where we've got a lead head teacher who's leading our programme of children and young people's mental health work in our clusters of schools. So in each of our boroughs, we've got a cluster of schools who are working together to improve the emotional well-being of their children and young people. And as a health and care partnership in southwest London, we've been able to support them significantly. We've put in mental health support teams to those schools, and we've been able to provide a lot of resource to them. But I was meant to be meeting the head teacher, Siobhan Lowe, who is absolutely superb, incredibly inspiring. She's the head of Tolworth Girls. So I was meant to be meeting with her for about 30 or 40 minutes, but I ended up being there for about an hour and a half, which was the case in all the visits I did to schools, because they were just so keen to talk about what they'd been doing and what they'd managed to achieve. And actually what they've managed to achieve as a group of schools is way beyond what we had set out in our project, so way beyond what we'd asked them to do. So it was really interesting for me. They've been supporting each other, they've been sharing best practice, and actually they've come up with better ideas than we had. And I think it was just a good lesson for me that what our role as South West London has really been to put resource into the schools, to support them, to give them ideas, to encourage them. But actually, we've given them the freedom to innovate, to make decisions for themselves and to come up with ideas. And then we've been able to share that learning with the other clusters across South West London. And I think I just want to say at the beginning of a South West London CCG, that's how we want to work in South West London. We want to support local areas to be successful. We want to give them the resources they need to do that. We want to be a way of sharing best practice from one area to another. And the other thing I'd say is we've responded to issues that have come out of those clusters of schools. So one thing they said to us is we want to use PHSE lessons to support our young people with their emotional well-being, but there's so much we could use, we don't know what's best and we don't have the expertise. So we were able as a South West London team to go and find resources for them, give them a suite of options that they could pick from and to pay for it. And again, it's just another example of how a South West London CCG can really support local places to be effective. In the programme, we've also made some decisions to do some things once across South West London. So a good example of that is we've procured online support for our children and young people, and that was actually a product called Cooth that was already used in Kingston. So we took good practice from Kingston and we recognised there was a need in every area, and we procured it once across South West London. So again, a really good example of where we've taken learning from one area but done something once at scale and really added value in that process. Another good example is schools told us that they were really struggling with different single point of access arrangements across South West London, because I hadn't realised, but each school obviously has children coming from multiple different boroughs with multiple different arrangements, and it was confusing for them. So what they said to us is, can you do some work to try and bring that together so that actually there's a common approach in each of the boroughs? So we've responded to that. That's something we're working on. And I think that's another really key principle is we will do some things once at South West London, but we want to agree that together. We want that to come from a bottom-up approach where you tell us what you think we can do best together once across South West London, and then we will do it really effectively. So that describes a bit about how I think we need to work. I think the other thing to say is sometimes we will need to tell people what to do from South West London. I think a good example coming up might be around coronavirus. So I'm the new clinical lead for South West London for coronavirus, and actually we've got a really good team working on it. I'm really confident about our arrangements. We will need to take a slightly different approach for that. We will need to be asking people to do things. But having said that, even in that context, what I hope is that we'll be able to hear good ideas that people have on the ground and take those good ideas and think about whether we then do that across South West London. And in the same way, when we tell people what to do, we don't expect people to blindly follow. If you think we're doing the wrong thing, we want to hear that and we'll listen. So hopefully that gives you an idea about how I think we're going to work. The final thing I just wanted to say was, obviously in the last week, we've had celebration events in each of the 6 boroughs, although Sutton's is this afternoon. And I just think it's been great to see people recognising the achievements of what our CCGs have done over the last 7 years. I'll say what I said in Merton yesterday. I think the biggest challenge that faces us as an NHS is workforce in many ways, and actually our workforce is under incredible pressure, whether that's people working in the CCGs or people working out in the community and provider organisations. And actually there's so much pressure, people get a lot of criticism sometimes, but we don't always take enough time to stop and say thank you and to recognise the great work that people have done. And I just thought it was great that we've been able to do that over the last week, and we'll be doing that in Sutton this afternoon. And on that note, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Graham Lewis, who is stepping down as Richmond CCG chair and won't be carrying on as the place-based lead for Richmond in the future. I just wanted to recognise your contribution, Graham, over a number of years, and more recently as chair, because you've done a great job there, and I think we all really appreciate that. Sarah, that's all I had to say, so over to you.
Right, so you have got a written report. I will be very brief. I think it's just worth mentioning that we can confirm now that the new governing body of South West London will meet in Croydon for its first meeting in May. We will get details onto the website, and we will ensure that people have all of the information that they need. The plan is that actually we will meet in each of the 6 boroughs as we move forward over the next 12 months. I thought I would mention the Improving Healthcare Together programme. You've got some information here. It's where we're looking at the future sustainability of Epsom and St Helier Trust. And 2 of our CCGs in South West London have been very involved in that and running the consultation process. So that's Sutton and Merton, working very closely with Surrey Downs. As we move into the new CCG in South West London, we will be meeting with Surrey CCG, Surrey Heartland CCG, in early summer to make a decision about the future of those services. And I will just mention coronavirus in the respect that we are working very hard across South West London with all of our providers and also within the CCGs and the STP to ensure that we are prepared for any eventualities. I'm confident that we have got all of the right things in place for our local populations in South West London, but I would urge members of the public to actually gain their advice from the national advice line and from NHS, www.nhs.uk. We're also asking people if they do need advice to access NHS 111 online, which is available. You just need to put 111 into your website and it will come up. And the main advice around how you look after yourself is to wash your hands thoroughly for at least 20 seconds. And all of the advice about that is on the 111 website.
Thank you, Sarah. So any questions in relation to anything we've talked about in the update? No? Okay, let's go straight on then to item 4 on the agenda, which is assisted conception assisted conception treatments and fertility preservation policy. Jonathan, you're going to talk to this, and this is for decision, this is for approval.
Yes, thank you very much, Andrew. So, as you say, what's before you today is the assisted conception treatment and fertility preservation policy for proposed for South West London for approval. As we all are aware, both in terms of freedom of information requests and in other ways, we know how high fertility preservation is on the public's mind and on patients' agendas. And I'm really pleased to be able to recommend this policy because it seeks to level up what we're doing across the 6 boroughs. We currently have different policies in different boroughs across South West London, and the goal is as soon as the new CCG is formed from day 1, we would have greater consistency in service provision and, as I say, a levelling up of services. The policy is very much based on the evidence. It's strongly based on clinical input, which is why I'm going to hand over very, very rapidly to Dr. Nikki Williams, who's going to talk through the clinical work that has led us to this place. And it also reflects the changes in national guidance that we've seen and in societal factors over the last few years to bring it up to date and contemporary for this point in time. So, as I say, I will hand over to Nikki to talk through some of the details of the policy, but I did want to say thank you to her and to CCG clinicians and chairs and others who've helped us work hard to frame a new policy that will improve access to these services going forward across South West London. So with that introduction, I'm happy to hand over to you, Nikki.
Thank you, thank you. So I suppose the first thing to outline is actually it's one policy, but there are two very separate sections. So just to outline, there's a section on assisted conception treatments and then a separate section on fertility preservation. We brought them into one policy because obviously they're very directly linked. So assisted conception treatments, I'm sure everybody knows, but we know 1 in 7 women, talking about it being a important issue, we know 1 in 7 women will potentially have problems conceiving. However, we do know that at 1 year of trying actively to conceive, 84% of those women will have conceived, and at 2 years, 92% of them will have conceived. Assisted conception treatments, just for those who don't know, it's defined as any medical, surgical or obstetric service provided for the purpose of assisting a person to carry a child. So in practice, this policy is dealing with IVF, so in vitro fertilization, ICSI, which is intracytoplasmic sperm injection, and IUI, which is intrauterine insemination. Those are long words, and we have no specialists to help us understand them, but that's what this policy covers. The second section of the policy covers fertility preservation, which, just for clarity, can also be called cryopreservation or cryostorage, and involves the harvesting, freezing of eggs and sperm, which may then in future be thawed for the use in future assisted conception treatment. So the process we've been through is the aim was to develop one policy, as Jonathan said, across the 6 CCGs, to make it clearer, more user-friendly, and to update it in line with guidance and changes in society. So just to say, the policy was very clinically led, involving clinical leads from all 6 CCGs and also public health. We also involved our 8 local specialist providers, testing the content once we'd written the policy to make sure that it would actually work in practice. We held a very well-attended workshop in December where 7 out of those 8 local providers came. We have had patient feedback from IVF consultations in Croydon, Kingston and Richmond, as well as using the 2018 National Fertility Survey to help us to inform the work. I'm not proposing to go through the whole policy line for line, but the key changes, just to highlight in the policy, is that Croydon residents will now have access to 1 cycle of IVF or ICSI, like all other South West London residents. The upper age of women will be brought in line with NICE guidance, so patients can access IVF and ICSI up to and including the age of 42. Childlessness criteria will be relaxed to allow individuals to have their own child, even if their partner already has one with someone else. Hormone levels, so in the form of FSH and AMH, will be part of the access criteria as per the NICE recommendations to select those patients who are most likely to benefit from IVF treatment. Fertility preservation will be available for any condition when patient's fertility is likely to be permanently affected by the treatment for that condition, including transgender patients. We undertook a comprehensive equality impact assessment on our current policies and looking at what would change with our new policy. And the key aim of the policy alignment was to ensure we had equitable access, not just geographically, but also all different patient groups. We are aware that the BAME community currently, under our current policy, present later and access treatment less. So that probably will still be the case with our current policy. So we are setting up a piece of work to capture that and to see what we can do to improve that. We feel the childless criteria in the current policies were not reflective of today's relationship structures and discriminates against patients whose partner have a child from a previous relationship. So the new policy will address that. Transgender patients have also had their right to fertility preservation explicitly recognised in the new policy. And young adults will get special concessions to extend their fertility preservation if their fertility is to be affected when they're young, to enable them to reach an age where you would naturally have a family. And I think that's probably, I'm going to hand back to you for next steps.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nikki, for that really clear summary of the changes in the policy, which, just for absolute clarity, are really about ensuring more women are able to have babies across South West London. That's the focus of the policy. So as I say, it's here for approval today. The intention is the policy then goes live on the 1st of April. Providers, you've listed, or at least 8 of them, are aware of the content of the policy, and indeed there has been some input of their views and perspectives into the development and thoughts of the policy. And we've got clear timelines for managing the transition process between now and the 1st of April and beyond. So we've got clear arrangements in place. As has already been said by Dr. Nikki Williams, there'll be the biggest impact will be for Croydon, given the current policy position there. So we're working through that with Croydon CCG colleagues as well as we sit here. So I think that's a brief synopsis of where we are, what this policy says, and what we intend to do to improve access from the 1st of April. So it's a really good thing to be recommending as a first thing to this emerging new governing body for one CCG. And with that, happy to hand back to you, Andrew, as Chair, for any questions that colleagues may have.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you to you and your team for the work you've put into this, because it's been a pretty comprehensive piece of work, and particular thanks to you, Nikki, because I know you've done a lot of work on this, so thank you. So let me open it up to the whole committee in common to ask whether people have got any questions or comments on the policy. Dino.
Thank you, Andrew. So I would, from a Sutton perspective, we've discussed this at governing body and wanted to reiterate that we felt the process has been extremely organised, transparent, inclusive, it's been equitable and really exemplary. With respect to the policy, as has been said, it moves not only South West London CCGs in harmony, but also the South West London region in harmony with nationally as well. So I think that's important to note. From a Sutton perspective, increases access, has been said, to assisted conception for women over 40 and childless couples. So it's well received, clinically relevant. We felt we could give it full governing body member support. The one comment that was made, particularly I suppose in respect to Sutton financial context, was just to ensure that the anticipated effect on volumes that may go through the service and delivery is monitored and against what is anticipated, which I'm sure it will be.
Yes, so thank you for those supportive words, Dina. That's really helpful. And of course, as we do all our commissioning activity, we'll of course continue to closely monitor the impact borough by borough, and that's really important. And also, given our equality duties, actually, as a board, it's really important too. And there's some detail on the quality and equality impact assessment set out here.
Naz.
Sorry, this is just a quick comment, just to say thanks to the team getting us here. I think in Kingston it was received very in a supportive way, and actually gets rid of the postcode lottery across South West London. So we thoroughly support it.
Yeah, do come in.
Thank you. I'm Vishali, and I just wanted to thank Jonathan, Zolly, Ash and Nikki for all your hard work. I know it's not been easy with all those meetings. For Croydon, it's a really positive change, and we all appreciate that change because it's going to make a big difference to the lives of our Croydon population. So it's gone through our clinical leadership group in Croydon and through the governing body members in Croydon, and it has been well supported. So thank you.
David, did you want to come in?
Yes, and again endorse the comments of other colleagues for the work that's been done on this policy. Jonathan, I don't know whether it's you or Nikki, but in this you talk about patient and public involvement and engagement in the policy, which is quite a brief synopsis there. Just be helpful, you know, if you just say a little more about what have we actually done to engage with members of the public on the policy, please.
Okay, so I think it's important to say that there's been a number of processes of consultation, both nationally and in South West London, on this issue over the last few years. So NICE, National Institute of Clinical Excellence, has in 2017 undertook extensive public and patient engagement before forming their recommendations. And indeed, through the Choosing Wisely work that took place both in Croydon and also in Richmond, a couple of years ago, there has been some significant engagement. I think there is the option that we would further engage with the public about some of the recommendations here. There have been a few members of the public involved in some of the working groups. However, given that extensive engagement that's occurred nationally, and frankly, given this is real progress, particularly for residents of Croydon, we could spend another 3 to 6 months going through that engagement process, which would actually impact negatively on access through that period. So we've made a carefully calibrated assessment about the degree of further patient engagement that we will want to take effect at this point of time, whilst also trying to ensure that we deliver what we need to deliver rapidly for women and families across South West London. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. So I'll come to you, Graham, and then Nicola.
Yes, so as Jonathan referenced, this was quite an issue in Richmond 3-4 years ago. We did have a large public engagement process, and we came to the conclusions that we came to then. This is an improvement on that, and the governing body, when it met recently, unanimously supported these changes.
Thank you. So this, I think this is a really much needed piece of work, and it's been mooted that there might be kind of a national policy at some point, but you know, we couldn't wait on that. It's really timely to have done this, and I think the process that the team has followed has been exemplary, and it actually sets the bar quite high for us in how we do these things. So thank you. And I think the level of engagement with stakeholders, with providers, has been particularly important and quite impressive, really. I chaired the provider stakeholder group, and it was standing room only. There was lots of interest there, and the insights, and it was done at a point in the process where the policy was well enough formulated so people could understand what we were trying to achieve, but still had the opportunity to feed in a really helpful, sensible way. So it really did improve the policy at that point, and I think that, you know, we're going to need to do that and do that really well. So it was a great start for us in sort of a South West London approach. So yeah, thanks very much, because I think you've worked really hard on this, and I think we've got to a really good place. Wandsworth Board were particularly keen on the kind of approach to the sense of fairness of it, and the fact that more people would be able to benefit. We felt that was really important.
Any other comments or questions before I go round each of the individual CCGs to hear your thoughts on whether you're happy to approve the policy? Anything else? No. So what I need to do now is to just go round and hear from each of the individual CCGs. So should we start with Sutton? Who's speaking on behalf of Sutton? Dino. So are you happy to approve the policy?
So,
or policies?
referring to my former comments, then we're fully supportive and we're happy to approve.
And Nicola from Wandsworth?
Yeah, likewise. So in terms of what I've just said, the element of fairness, the clinical approach that we've had and the general process has been really good, and Wandsworth are very happy to support it.
David, you're speaking on behalf of Merton.
And Merton is very happy to support the policy.
So Graham for Richmond?
Richmond unanimously approves it.
And Naz for Kingston?
Kingston approves it.
And Vishali, are you speaking on behalf of Croydon?
Yes, thank you. And Croydon's very happy to approve it as well. Thank you.
Excellent. So really well done. Thank you. I mean, I think you've had a lot of positive feedback about what a great piece of work it is, and we're happy unanimously to approve the policy. Thank you. So we go on now to item 5, which is an update item, and that's Ben, you're going to give us an update on where we're at with the Moving Forward Together process.
Thank you, Andrew. So, as I think you all know, we've been discussing the merger of the South West London CCGs for the last year and more, and I've been updating the governing bodies on the progress we've been making with that process since the summer, I think, and I'm very pleased that this will be my final update before merger, I very much hope. So I'll just walk you through the paper and the headings that I've got in here very briefly. So, as we discussed at our last governing bodies, we've agreed the committee structure for the new governing body, and at the beginning of February we agreed all of the membership for those committees, and bar 1 or 2 dates, I'm very close to finalising the meeting schedule for all of those committees for the next year as well. We finalised the governance documents for the new CCG, and they've gone to NHS England, and yesterday we received confirmation from NHS England that they will be sending us our grant for merger in the next week or so. There have been a number of changes, obviously, to the governance documents since we last formally discussed them at the governing bodies, and Annex A just provides you with a very high-level overview of the main non-substantive changes. So although there have been some changes to the governance documents, none of these have been of a really substantive nature, but I've just outlined the main ones in Annex A for you. Annex B just gives you an overview of where we are for the programme as a whole, so provides the status report for the programme. And as you can see, we remain on track to create the new CCG on the 1st of April. There's a lot to get done within the last 3 weeks of the programme, but I'm very confident that we're going to achieve that date. I've given you a bit more information from paragraph 6 about the asset transfers, because that was one of the last big things we needed to sort in the last quarter of the year. So, because the 6 CCGs are ceasing to exist, we need to transfer their assets into the new CCG. We do this by way of a transfer scheme. There are 2 types of transfer schemes, a people transfer, staff transfer scheme and a property transfer scheme. Transfer schemes were created under the 2012 Act to move assets across the health service in that reorganisation. And at that point were hugely detailed because the assets were going to various places across the health service. These ones are a lot simpler because there is only one place that the assets from the 6 CCGs can go, and that's into the new organisation. So they're going to be very high-level documents. However, to make sure that we know the assets that are transferring into the new CCG, we've gone through our own due diligence process to do that. So we've created 3 asset lists to help us do that. So we've got a a staff list of all those who will be tubing into the new organisation, which is the effect of the transfer scheme. We've created an IT asset list that lists all of the hardware we have as CCGs and the licences we need to run that. And finally, we've created a new cross South West London information asset register. We've also created a contracts register for the new CCG, and that's an amalgamation of the contracts registers from the 6 existing CCGs. And again, all of that will be in place for the 1st of April, and then in the new organisation we will have an audit committee towards the beginning of a new financial year, which will accept all of those assets on behalf of the new CCG. As I've been coming around to the governing bodies over the last few months, we've obviously been giving you an update on where we are in the HR process throughout this period. So, as you know, we finished the staff consultation at the end of December. The SMT then considered the responses we had to that, and we finalised the structure for the new organisation in January, and we were then able to tell our staff whether they slotted directly into a new position in the new organisation, of which 70% of our staff did, whether they might be subject to a competitive slotting for that, so whether it was more than one individual that might be eligible for a post, or where they might be subject to a suitable alternative employment process. We've finished the majority of the appeals around that, and we're into the process of people who are subject to suitable alternative employment expressing an interest in the roles that are left within the organisation with that, and then we'll start very shortly the interview process for those roles. And again, we're on track to complete that by the end of this month. Andrew has covered the celebration events, which I just listed at the end, because I thought it was an appropriate way to finish my last update to the governing body. I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Andrew. Very happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Ben, and thank you again to you and all your team for the work you're doing on this, because I know it's a huge piece of work, and in fact it's involving everyone in all 6 CCGs, and particularly the Alliance team centrally. So I know how much work is going into this, and I think you're doing an incredible job to get us where we need to get to. Any questions or comments on this particular item? Sarah?
I just actually wanted to add to it that I was required to write to NHS England to confirm the due diligence and that we had everything in place, so that we had appointed our governing body and that we had got our constitution into the right place. I have done that this week, so that has gone. So that was one of the items that we had to do. So in order for us to actually take to the next stage, that is all complete now as well.
Matthew?
Thank you, Andrew. So, Ben, thanks for the update, and positive that it's progressing as you've described. And clearly, from a technical perspective, the time is ticking over and it's going to get concluded in the way that you've set out. And that's, I think, as I say, positive. I guess my question is, this isn't a technical, logistical process, is it? Ultimately, it's about people and how they work and how they feel about where they work. And so, obviously, from a Croydon perspective, we're doing work and thinking on that now in terms of the OD work that we need to do come April. But I'd be interested in a South West London perspective on that as well, and how we might build that both in place and across South West London, both individually and together, because I think that's going to be crucial.
So I think so. It happens on multiple levels, doesn't it, Matthew? So, so we have a leadership forum that we set up some time ago to help us shape and move the organisations from where they were to where they need to be in the future into a single organisation. And we've already begun to talk about some of those things with them. So we had a conversation with them on Monday around what's the kind of leadership behaviours and qualities we want in the new organisation, and what about management, the essentials of management. So I think we'll have to design an OD programme. We've drafted a workforce and OD strategy for the new organisation, which we will bring through to the governing body at its first meeting and work through those. But there's also the governing body itself, isn't there? And an OD programme for bringing 6 organisational leadership teams together. So I think it's going to happen on multiple levels. And we around the table will have to design the right OD programme for
all of us, but I think it has to happen at both Borough and then South West London. But we'll bring the outline of that to the first meeting in April or May, I think it is. So.
Anyone else? No? Thank you, Ben, for that update. Really helpful. So we'll go straight on to item 7, which is reports on performance and finance. So we're going to start with performance, and Jonathan, that is back to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So you have a draft performance report in your papers, and apologies, it's orientated in the wrong way round in the hard copy papers, so it's somewhat hard to see the detail of it. Hopefully easier if you have an electronic copy. I think it would, I'd welcome actually the views of the committee in common on 2 issues really. Obviously the matters of substance in the report that I will draw out a few headlines for in a moment. And also the nature of the report and what the emerging governing body members would like to see in their performance report as the new CCG emerges. In terms of the report itself, as you can see, it's structured area by area, so it covers the key performance issues and challenges that we face as CCGs. It doesn't cover every aspect of the oversight framework, but rest assured, together with other colleagues, we are closely monitoring all the indicators on which we will be collectively judged. In terms of the headline messages, which are the second slide in, I've sort of tried to list 4 areas of success and 4 areas of ongoing challenge across South West London. So starting with the areas of success. So our performance for cancer patients consistently is amongst the best in the country in terms of access to services. You can see that summarised in our referral to first definitive treatment time as set out in this paper, with more than 88% of patients at provider level receiving their treatment within 62 days across South West London, and that sometimes with the best performing STP in the country, but currently the 3rd best performing STP given that performance. So I think that is a noteworthy point. I'd also like to note the progress that has been made over the last couple of years, really, and all the hard work of colleagues to improve both dementia diagnosis and access to psychological therapy services across South West London. That's been a real challenge in particular boroughs, and we've managed to make a real step change, and you can see some of that summarised in the paper. Similarly, access to personal health budgets was an area a year or so ago where we were not doing as well as we would have liked to do as an STP and at an individual borough level. And again, you can see reflected in the pack a significant upswing in access to personal health budgets for patients across South West London. And the 4th area of success, I think it would be frank to say it was an area of success until the impact of coronavirus began to be felt. So our integrated urgent care provider, which of course includes the 111 service, had seen a significant improvement in performance in the last few months after being very challenged. Of course, with the recent coronavirus expectation that patients contact 111 rather than going into a GP surgery or to a hospital, that has put that system under very significant pressure, and it will have a consequent performance impact. And as Sarah said at the beginning, of course the advice to patients is to go to 111 online, given the pressures that service is experiencing at the moment as it ratchets up, and on some days experiences 3 times the call volumes that it would have routinely experienced at that point in time. Of course, the NHS is doing much to gear up for that, but it does take time to put the key call handlers and other clinical personnel in place. So those are the areas of success. And I think the areas of challenge, of course, particularly on a day like today, we can't be reminded that winter has not completely left us, and winter urgent emergency care performance has continued to be a challenge across South West London. It's been a challenge, as people will know, across the capital and across London. But I think it would be also fair to say access to those services is just not where it needs to be, and is not acceptable in some systems on particular given days. And you can see that summarised in the report here. And people will be well aware of the immense amount of work going across all our local systems to provide the best access we can through what will be an ongoing challenging period with the COVID-19 outbreak. So the UC performance being a critical issue, so diagnostics performance is also a real challenge for us at this point in time. I think it would be fair to note that we've gone from being the best performing STP to the most challenged against this metric in a relatively short space of time. I've sought reassurance from providers about the impact on cancer pathways and had those reassurances. I think we need to break the issue down between where there is a specific site issue, so an MRI scanner is down or an endoscopy suite needs to be put in place, from systemic issues. So, for example, echocardiograms is an issue for all 4 of our acute trusts. We probably need a systemic South West London solution to that. In terms of access to elective care, NHS England has made very clear they expect there to be no 52-week waiters by the end of March, so by the end of this month. You can see that we, as of December, which is the period covered by this report, we had 26. Most of those, more than half, were outside South West London. Providers like Guy's and St Thomas's, so there's a limit to what we can do to address those. But the absolute expectation is that for the 4 trusts within South West London, 4 acute trusts, that we clear any 52-week waiters by the end of this month. And more generally around the elective waiting list position, we've seen a growth in the overall numbers of people waiting. That often occurs through the winter, but it's probably been steeper than we would have liked it to be. And given the impact of COVID-19 as well and the potential impact on planned care, that's something we'll be very carefully watching over the coming months and trying to ensure that we put the right mechanisms in place to allow a flow of activity around South West London wherever possible. So hopefully that's helpful, but that's so happy to take any comments or questions on the detail of the report, or indeed any views about how we structure this report to the emerging new governing body. But hopefully that's a helpful summary of where we are and some of the key challenges and successes.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So why don't we try and take comments and questions on those 2 things separately. So if we start with the substance of the report and any questions or comments in relation to the things that you've highlighted, and then we could get some feedback on the format of the report. So should we start with the first thing? Sorry, I'm struggling with the layout to catch everyone's eye. Pippa.
Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. You've helpfully drawn out some areas for us in your headline messages. Can I ask for some further clarity around the 12-hour breaches? I was concerned to see that of the 49 in here, 43 of them were mental health. And I've got a couple of questions. Are those split up amongst the providers here that you've set out here, or are they cohorted in a particular area? And also, are we anticipating that this is likely to be an issue going forward, and how are we coping with this?
So I think if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said the issue around long waits for mental health access was most centralised in the Croydon system, and Croydon has South London and Maudsley as its provider of mental health services. I think what we've seen is some further challenge actually in South West London St George's Mental Health Trust, which covers the other 5 boroughs in recent weeks actually, and probably since the Christmas period. So the short answer to your question was, I think it has changed and it has moved, and now it is an issue across all 4 trusts to varying degrees. It would be fair to note, whilst of course it's completely unacceptable to have these numbers of 12-hour breaches, they are relatively low in comparison with what you will see in other parts of the capital. Having said that, there's absolutely no complacency about this, and there are, without any exaggeration, at least 3 or 4 calls a day going on in each system where there are long waiters who need to be found a appropriate bed or facility to try and secure that. So it is tough and it is very challenging, but other colleagues might want to talk. Tonya might want to talk. Matthew, with his from acute trust perspective, might want to add more to this. But I'm very clear that we're very, very closely monitoring these patients and doing all we can to try and move them on, because it's not an appropriate environment for them. It's not an appropriate environment for other patients in the emergency department, and it's absolutely not an appropriate environment and not the right context for staff who work in those facilities too. So for all those reasons, we are doing our very best at some tricky times. But as I say, maybe others might want to add from their perspectives too.
Tonya.
Hello, I'm also the mental health SRO for South West London, and absolutely agree with Jonathan. It's not acceptable that anyone waits for 12 hours in an ED in mental health crisis, but we are doing quite a lot of work around investing in alternatives. And I was talking to Vanessa Ford yesterday, who's Chief Executive of South West London St George's Mental Health Trust, and we want to set a very bold ambition to have no 24-hour, 12-hour, sorry, 24, no, definitely no 24, but no 12-hour breaches in mental health in 2021. And what would we need to do to be able to make that happen, and the investment we need, and the work that we're doing at the moment around alternatives to crisis, so areas of opening crisis cafes. We've invested in increased capacity at the Lotus Suite at Springfield Hospital, which is the psychiatric decision unit. We're looking at a significant transformation programme in the community mental health services. So we are hopeful that the focus we have around transforming mental health services and preventing people needing to wait long waits in ED, we hope to see a real improvement in 2021.
Thank you, Tonya. Let me bring Matthew in.
Thank you, Andrew. I obviously sit here with 2 slightly different perspectives, one as a provider and one as the place-based leader for health. In terms of a provider perspective, I can absolutely endorse what Jonathan said. The willingness and the desire to improve this is hugely significant across the whole patch. I know that from talking to colleagues in other boroughs, certainly is in Croydon, where there has, as Jonathan says, been historically some real significant challenges. And I would be positive about that willingness and indeed the amount of work that's going on, and some good progress being made, both in terms of capacity and also changing how the pathway works, so alternatives to the emergency department, because to be honest, that's probably the biggest single improvement that we could make to create robust, sustainable, available alternatives to patients coming to an A&E department when they're in a mental health crisis. That's clearly not the best route for them, and we should do everything we can to try to find alternatives. And there is, from my personal perspective, good work going on with that. The difficulty is that takes time, and even when it's in place, there are still spikes in activity, and there are individual cases that wait a good longer than 12 hours for placement. And I think it's probably worthy of note that the staff who are working in those departments, in all the experience that I've had, are working extremely hard to try and manage those patients in the best possible way that they can, cognizant of the fact that they're also trying to manage a busy emergency department with physical health requirements for the other patients too. So it's not easy, it's not the position we want to be in. There is good work going on, I believe, and I'm hopeful that that will show improvement, but it's not going to be immediate, and there are individual cases where patients are waiting, unfortunately, way too long, and well in excess of 12 hours for placement. I've been dealing, not personally, but our organisation has been dealing with two very challenging cases indeed this week of patients who are there for multiple days waiting for a placement because the capacity is just not there in the system. So that's the challenge that we have and the work that we're doing to address it.
Thank you. Sarah.
So I'm just going to make a comment because somebody else asked me this actually earlier, so I'm going to put it in, which is you asked about also the presentation of the report, Jonathan, and so it has been raised with me that actually maybe we should be looking at statistical process control to think about how we might present how things are changing over time as part of our reporting at South West London level. So I wonder if we can look into that going forward. This is a first report, and we've drawn together, I think, the reports from all 6 CCGs into one. And I think actually it's really helpful to have that view across South West London, but I think the more we can do to understand what's changing and how things are progressing would be really positive.
I will go and get my A-level maths textbook out of the cupboard.
Should we move into that then? Any other questions or comments around the information we're getting and how it's presented? David?
I think my comment also relates to the next paper, the finance paper. And I think it's really difficult to get the information right because I think as individuals, you know, our need for detail is different. So I think there is an issue for us in terms of what comes here and also what goes to the committees. I just wonder whether, you know, a small group of people just need to get together, maybe, on both of the reports, just to try to actually have some thought around, you know, partly what goes through each of the committees. I mean, partly, clearly, I'm going to look at the Finance Committee and be working with James on that, but I think so much also relates to the Performance Committee, and maybe we should just, you know, say, just a small group of us across your area and also James, you just need to get together just to try and kick some of this around and maybe bring back a proposal.
Jonathan, what are your thoughts on that and what you're already doing?
So I think that's really a helpful suggestion. I think it also encompasses quality, actually. I think that's another important aspect of what we need to do. So I'm happy to do that. As I say, as the formal sort of subcommittee structure of the governing body comes into effect, as David's outlined, I think that's a really helpful way of doing things, and of course we need to find the right balance within the resources we have available to us of what we can do that supports the governing bodies working and indeed local place-based working, and so I think that would be a really helpful suggestion.
Do you want to just give that some thought about how you want to do that, and also then maybe the ask of governing body members whether you want subsequently for people to just perhaps let you know if they're happy to be part of that work?
Sure.
I'll leave that with you for how you take that forward.
As an initial reaction, clearly members of the Equality and Performance Oversight Group and probably a few additional members of the governing body are probably the right people to have in the room, but perhaps together with Ben as Chief of Staff we can take that forward. Is that okay?
Graham.
So just a few basic principles without going into the A-level thing. I think David's comment is very useful. Let's have a focus group that looks at this. I think there should be 3 things on the page: data, narrative and graphs. So a single snapshot of data doesn't tell you what's happening over time. Graphs do. We are useless as a species at looking at a sea of numbers, whereas actually pictures are much more useful to us. I would have it in as much a raw form as possible. So the moment you start doing SPC, or even there are percentages here to 2 or 3 decimal places, I don't think that's necessarily terribly helpful. And that percentages without absolute numbers are no help at all. So, you know, a percentage of a small number is still a small number, or a percentage of a big number is a huge number. So I think we need to look at closely, if we're going to analyse stuff, what the purpose of that analysis is.
So I think you're going to get a range of views on this as well, in terms of what people want and how much they want to see. So I think the idea of getting a group together to agree that is probably really sensible.
So I agree with that, and we probably won't meet everyone's absolute needs and expectations in that, but we'll do our best. I would say I hope that people feel even what they have is quite a good summary of where we are, and gives and does allow people to challenge, because there is a mixture of detail, narrative, graphs, numbers. So hopefully people feel we have a solid bedrock on which to build. But let's do what David's proposed and do it through that group.
Patrick, shall I bring you in?
Thank you, Henry. With the long delays, is dual diagnosis of intoxication and the need to observe, is that a significant part of that picture?
So it will be a part of the picture. It's not the whole part of the picture. The fundamental problem is largely for a lot of patients about bed capacity in mental health facilities. That's the fundamental challenge for both adults and children and specialist services.
So I think we've got an agreed way forward around presentation, what people need to see. I did want to check whether people had any other areas that have been highlighted that they wanted to raise anything on. Sorry, Matthew, what were you wanting to come in on?
Yeah, so I was just going to raise it. It wasn't on the presentation piece. I think the proposal for getting an agreed way forward is sensible. But I suppose in terms of content, the other one to flag, we focused a bit on emergency care for mental health patients. I mean, the other one clearly is emergency care as a totality, and linking. I mean, it's a concern for everybody, and is a conversation Jonathan and I have very regularly, because we're just lucky like that. But the serious point is that there is a concern. There is a concern that's across the whole of the patch. I think there's other fora where that discussion will take place, any delivery boards locally in places, and the Urgent Emergency Care Transformation Board across South West London. But here, there is something about looking at what is happening now and what potentially will be coming forward, because there's new performance metrics to come out that might start to throw a different light on some of the issues that we've got, both positively and negatively. And so I think there is probably something around the future reports that also is looking at some of that new work that's coming, rather than just focusing on now, and using that as a way to sort of refresh our enthusiasm. Not that that's lacking, but it would be good to keep that urgent care piece at the forefront of people's minds, and I think the new metrics might be a good way of doing so.
So would you be willing to work with Jonathan to have a think about what that might look like?
Very happy to.
So because I think that's a very sensible suggestion.
Yeah.
Anything else in terms of the substance of what's in the report? No? Okay. So it was really for noting and discussion of the items that are raised, and also we had the specific question around format, which I think we've dealt with. So let's close that item. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Let's go on then to finance report. James.
Yep, fine. So what you've got in front of you is a slightly cut down version of what goes to our finance committee in common, which meets regularly and has been meeting so for about 18 months, so we're quite used to looking across the system in terms of the financial information. We'll take on board with David about how we review that going forward, because I think there's a lot of detail in there and we can streamline that, but it's a useful start point for people, A, to see all the data, but B, just to recognise that we already look at that on a combined basis already, so doing that within the new CCG won't be a completely new transition. We've also agreed through the Finance Committee as part of how we move from 6 to 1 that we'll have a sort of handover of key risks through the Finance Committee. So we're doing that this month. So David, in his new role, will receive from each of the CCGs what some of the current sort of concerns are from each of the old organisations. So that will be handed over there. The other thing just to highlight then, which I think is quite important given what Andrew said in his opening opening speech, is that clearly we are one CCG, but we'll need to report at a borough basis. So again, part of showing this report will mean that we can break things down to a borough basis, a place base, where we need to work together as boroughs, but also then as we move into the development of ICSs, how we then move into bringing provider expenditure and the whole ICS position into that. So we've thought quite a lot through finance about how we set the structure up to do that, and this report will evolve over the coming sort of months and probably years as we go through. So rest assured that as we go into one CCG, you will still be able to see the sort of place-based analysis that we've got there. So that's a sort of process preamble. In terms of the more important thing, I guess, in the short term, which is the numbers. So this is the month 9 report. We've had one CCG at month 9 which has moved its position to a 6 million deficit, which is Sutton. All others are currently reporting on trajectory. And I think that's, given the difficulties as we always have with finance, I think that's something that we need to note as being quite an achievement to get to that stage as we move to the final bits of the final piece of the year. I think particularly just to call out Croydon, who have clearly this year will be reporting a surplus, which is a big shift from where they've been in previous years, and I think the new CCG needs to recognise the change that's been brought about from that, and also Richmond, which is reporting to balance this year for the first time in a while. So again, I think it's worth recognising the work that's gone on in both of those places to get there. Notwithstanding that, there's been a lot of pressures. We're working much closer now with trusts about how we manage the system position. There are some tricky areas where we've managed non-recurrently, so that's put some pressure on the underlying positions as we go into the new year and gives us extra challenges as we go into the new year. And when we come on to planning a little bit later, those have been fed into the financial planning, so those haven't been forgotten. They give us an extra challenge going into the new year, and you know, we'll need to manage those as we go through. In terms of the overall system balance, because we now have to manage, we're expected across London and nationally to manage with an STP. At the moment, despite Sutton going out, we think we're still on target to perform for South West London within an STP balance, as we have an underspend at RMH offset by an overspend at St George's. So at the moment, we think we are on course to balance the position towards the end of the year, which again, given the pressures in the system, is an achievement for all organisations within the system. The critical thing for that we're just working through at the moment with NHSE is making sure that the provider who has moved out will be able to retain what they call their financial recovery fund, despite the fact they've gone off trajectory, because the rest of the system has been able to help them. So we haven't had that confirmed yet, but that's what we're striving to do, and it's just a hint really of the future as we go forward in how we need to look things not just as our own organisation but as a system going forward. Notwithstanding, although we're in the middle of March, there are still some pressures that people are trying to manage. So people have already talked about the never-ending winter we seem to be experiencing at the moment, and that's given pressures within providers and CCGs, and we're trying as a system to manage those pressures. We've had a little bit of extra money to help us do that. We're also just trying to manage the fallout, I guess, of the GP at hand service, which is covered within our positions, but there's still a potential for that to swing in the final quarter, and that's where in North West London, you've got the Babylon system, which has the potential to move patients around and can be disruptive to the way we work on allocations, but we've got that built into our position, but that could move. And then again, you can have a conversation without coronavirus at the moment, so there is money being expended on coronavirus and the preparations for that, and I'd imagine that's going to accelerate over the coming months. We're not using finance as a limiting factor to do what we need to do on that. We have submitted something to the department that says this is what we think we will need to spend. We're keeping a close track on what we are actually spending, and clearly we work with them to make sure that where necessary that we can get any money that's coming for that, but we're not using that as money as a limiting factor to stopping us doing what we need to do. Happy to take any questions. I say on the presentation of the report, we'll pick that up on in exactly the process that we've described previously.
Yeah, which I think would be really helpful. But I mean, obviously it's a really complicated position, but I think you've described it very clearly, and also just I guess to recognise the achievement of you and all the finance teams in getting us to where we are now. So thank you and well done. I think it's really strong. Shall I open it up to questions or comments then on James's report? Yeah, David, do you want to say something?
Yes. Can I, unless Dino was going to say something, just on the Sutton position, because clearly as the audit chair of Sutton, I can make the comment as well, but just a note on Sutton, because as James says, that's the one CCG that we had to change the position, and we reported a different position in December. I just wonder, James, whether it's just worth just saying a little more about the financial recovery plan, because there is a plan and there's a process and there's governance around it, but it is a very challenging programme that Sutton need to deliver. So I just think just a few words from you, just so that the rest of the board have got the context in terms of the challenge that's facing that system.
So if you look at the Sutton position, you've really got a three-way conundrum we're trying to manage there. So Sutton CCG is trying to get itself into financial balance. So we had a deficit last year, we've got a deficit this year. There's a lot of work being done on the recovery plan to help us get that into a better position. Clearly their main trust is Epsom St Helier, which crosses two STPs as well, two systems, so that adds further complication, because the other part of the system is Surrey Downs, which is also financially challenged. So we've got a three-challenged system, if you like, that we're trying to work together. What we've now got set up, and we have had now for a year, is a joint recovery plan, and we have a joint recovery board with all three of those organisations, and that's started to pull together. There's some good work been done this year. I think one of the experiences we take away, and I mentioned earlier Richmond and Croydon as having done a lot of work to get themselves into a better position, it does take time to get these things sorted. So it's almost a period of stability that you need to get to, then a period of working things up, and then things starting to bite. And that's the phase we need to get into this year now with Sutton. So there's a lot of good work being done within the three systems to get us into a better prepared place. Now what we need to do is drive on and make those things happen.
Sarah.
So I do think that's important. I mean, what I've seen is that it's a 2-year turnaround. You have to, the first year you have to stabilise the position because you're on a downward trend, and I think that's what we've been trying to do. And I think we've done okay on that. I think we could do better, but we've done okay on that in Sutton. And then the next year is when you start to improve the position. That's definitely what we've seen in Richmond. I think Croydon probably would say the same. It's taken a number of years to stabilise the position and then to start improvement. So I'm hoping to see that Sutton will improve in 2021, and that is the plan. What we will need to do is keep a close eye on that and monitor that as we go forward as a CCG in South West London.
Thank you, Sarah. So any other questions or comments for James? No? So this was for information and discussion, so we've done that. Thank you very much, James. Let's go on then to the next item on the agenda, which is the effective commissioning initiative item. This again is a paper for decision. So Jonathan, back to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. as the double act with Dr. Nikki Williams worked so well an hour ago, I will continue, I think, with that approach. I'll do a short introduction and then Nikki can talk through a little bit more of the details. So just to say what ECI stands for, so it stands for Effective Commissioning Initiative, and it's really about ensuring patients get access to effective treatments that will make a difference to them. Actually, the first policy this committee in common received back in 2017 was a joint policy on effective commissioning, and this is really a brief update to that policy. The long document in the pack covers 57 clinical areas, and Nikki will talk in a moment about some of the minor changes that we needed to make to just update that policy to keep it fresh and alive with changing clinical practice. It's also worth reminding colleagues that a lot of this work has taken on greater speed nationally over the last year or two, and now evidence-based interventions, as it's described nationally, are a big contractual requirement with all our providers, and we've input extensively into that process. So people around this table, colleagues in the front row of the audience, have been heavily involved in helping shape that national programme of work, and continue to be heavily involved in some of the national committees setting that out. So thank you to them as well for keeping us at the forefront of our understanding on where we are with effective commissioning and evidence-based interventions across the country, because we are one of the national exemplars for that programme of work. So that's by way of introduction, and just to remind the committee what we're asking them to improve the update of the policy as set out, and also to note that come 2021 we're expecting that national programme to have landed more in terms of its expectations about the range of procedures that were covered. So this is a constantly evolving thing and something that we'll need to continue to update. But this is hopefully a fairly minor and technical update from where we were before. Nikki, over to you.
So generally the changes we are asking for approval of are minor. Following the sign-off of the last policy, which was in February 2019, I believe, we went on to implement this, which involved a lot of discussions with providers in South West London, and out of that came minor issues around either practically implementing or of a clinical nature. And generally, if you look at the table in the papers, they fell into two groups. There were some that were minor, which could be solved through discussion, and we approved those changes. Some of them we felt that were proposed, we felt required further evidence review, and also we needed to assess the potential impact from an equality and quality point of view. So we proposed that those were rejected for this version, but actually were put forward for the next version, which Jonathan's already discussed would happen in 2020-21. So I don't think we need to go through each one line by line. Most of the minor changes really revolved around a treatment called photodynamic therapy, which is used in dermatological conditions, and also some minor changes around wording for diagnostic and therapeutic spinal injections. I'm happy to take any questions about that.
Thank you very much. And is it right to say that this has been through all 6 CCG governing bodies previously as well, so people have had an opportunity to look at that?
Yeah, in seminar, yes.
That's right. So people should be familiar with this. So shall I open it up then to any questions or comments? Naz.
Hi, thanks a lot. I do recognise this. The only question I've got, and thank you for taking on board our comments back from the seminars within the CCGs. On page 107, as regards to Dupitrons, I just want clarification. So number 5 is actually completely removed.
I have to go
on page.
So
107.
where are we at? Page 107.
Page 107.
thank you for getting that far through it, Naz. I might be deferring to colleagues on the on the front row.
So basically it says remove criteria in red. Patient has all the following risk factors for aggressive progression: bilateral disease, family history, ectopic lesions, sex male, age under 50. So are we removing that whole section? Because I wasn't quite clear whether it was the whole section being removed.
So, I think we agreed to remove it because there was weak evidence supporting having that actually in the policy. Yeah, so I think we agreed to remove that entirely.
So that's my understanding. If our resident experts have any other comment to make, I will feed it back outside here to the members of the committee.
Any other questions or comments? Dino.
Thank you. So some governing body members have looked at this. Again, in terms of process, very pleased it's been inclusive and very well engaged, good engagement really from a lot of clinicians. Having been personally involved in the original process, I know people who led that process are still leading this one, and personally have a lot of confidence in this kind of work being able to be done across South West London. Policy, clinical criteria, we support. The one concern that has been raised is the need, probably more a practical concern, for filling in the sort of blue tech process, and in fact the potential impact that might have in terms of time, but also increased turnaround and potential delay for patient pathways, and whether that would actually particularly impact community providers. It's not directly relating to this policy, but as a result of implementing the policy, whether that will have an impact at a community provider level particularly.
I think from the point of view of delayed in patients' pathways, I think it's important to note that currently, and my colleagues can correct me, that the turnaround is 24 to 48 hours for approval, so we wouldn't expect that any filling in of a blue tech form would delay a patient's treatment unnecessarily. There also is being the ability to urgently push those through as well, if there was a need for urgent, remembering that this policy does not apply to any cancer or emergency treatment. So we would assume it was for elective procedures. So we would feel, 2 to 3 days turnaround shouldn't adversely affect their management. We are currently looking at blue tech, and it was always proposed that we would look at the impact that process had on the numbers, and if the percentage was 100% approved, we would look at whether there was a necessity to do it at all. So it is in the work stream to do that work.
I suppose I would flag it's an area, whilst we do need to review that, and we constantly do review it area by area, it is an area where sort of ongoing continual effort is needed, and there are areas of significant further opportunity, though we do well, and as I said earlier, colleagues are involved in work with the national team around this. There are still a number of areas, if you look across our providers, where there is further opportunity. So we need to balance the administrative burden of doing this with the impact that it has. But rest assured that we do regularly review that.
James, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, just in support of that point, really. I think I wouldn't, having been involved in the implementation of the system now in 2 areas, I wouldn't underestimate the value to us as a system of knowing what we are treating and knowing that it is within the thresholds and the guidance that we've set. So I just support Jonathan in terms of just the balance of factors when we're looking at the role of the blue tech system.
Anything else? Right, I think we're probably in a position to go around the individual CCGs to get approval for this. So shall we start with Sutton again? Are you happy to approve the changes set out here, the revised policy?
So referring to previous comments, yes, Sutton approves the policy.
Nicola for Wandsworth?
Wandsworth board, we're happy with this.
Thank you. And then David for Merton?
Yes, Merton approves.
Carrying on Richmond,
Richmond
Graham?
are very happy to approve. Also, we noted this is evidence of where to cycle back to where we started, where things can be done at scale. They should be done at scale.
Naz for Kingston?
Kingston, happy to approve.
And Charlotte for Croydon?
Croydon, happy to approve.
Excellent. So that then is approved by all 6 CCGs and by the committee in common. So thank you very much for that. So we will now go on to a verbal update on annual planning for South West London. So a brief verbal update for note, I believe.
I'll start, I think, and then hand over to James to draw some conclusions. And I will start with the rider. Of course, our planning round is subject to some immense change and some immense pressures through the COVID-19 process at the moment. So I would ask people to bear in mind you can only plan for what we know for, as it were, so around the operating plan cycle. So just to explain to members of the audience, the operating plan is how we, as an NHS, plan for what we're going to do in the year ahead. So this is about how we're going to work together as a system to deliver the changes we need to make through 2021. There is a lengthy planning document, as is often the case, of about 45 pages that sets out what we need to achieve as a NHS this year. That's a national document, and we are required, both as individual organisations and then as a system, really, to respond to that over the period of March and April. But just to highlight some of the areas, apologies I can't mention all areas given the brief time we've got, but a few areas probably to call out of particular note. So on urgent emergency care, the expectation is we improve our position on bed occupancy in the year ahead. Mirrors some of the comments earlier about the pressures that we've experienced in A&E, and that of course presents a whole range of challenges to the system and to providers within the system, given the capacity and occupancy levels and estate and all the issues around that. But I think that's probably one area I'd like to draw out. The scale of outpatient transformation that we need to deliver in the coming year is another area as we move towards reducing face-to-face appointments by 30% by 23-24. The further support to primary care networks to embed them and to support them to deliver the national specifications. And I'd also flag, in terms of workforce, the bursaries of £1,000 available for nurses, midwives and AHPs going forward. So there's an awfully lot more in the planning guidance, and I encourage people to read it, but there's just a snapshot of a couple of areas that drew my attention through it. We're submitting today our first draft operating plan. That's part of the reason this is a verbal update, because this is a fast-moving piece of work. That is a first submission. A lot of the guidance only emerged at the very end of January or beginning of February. And we will, of course, share the final submissions with the governing body once we've got to a place that we're able to do those. The requirement is that we reach agreement on contracts within our system by the 27th of March, and we're making really good progress. As people know, we made a lot of progress over the last couple of years of working as a system, and I'm sure James will say more about how we're doing that around the money, but we're expecting to submit against a whole raft of returns, strongly or in completely aligned returns on things like finance, activity, performance and workforce. And then we have a further month till the 29th of April to move from those draft plans to final operating plans, and also a final narrative that we will need to submit. And again, as I said earlier, I think those would be appropriate to share at the governing body in May, once we've got to a place of being able to share those draft plans with system support with NHS England. So hopefully that's probably all. As I say, it's very fast moving. That's probably all I want to say by way of a summary of where we are at this point in time, and just to note the immense amount of work going on in place in individual boroughs to try and drive this forward and across the system, and just to thank people for that too. So that's probably all I was going to say by way of introduction. James?
Yes, just to build on that a little bit around the finance side, just pick up a couple of technical points. So, I mean, first of all, the allocations that we received last year were reconfirmed within the planning guidance. They've actually gone up slightly, about £1.5 million, which doesn't add up to much when you add it across South West London, although everything's welcome. But it's been set at a South West London level, so just to note the changing environment. But clearly, when we've used that on when we've set the local budgets, they're all set on the place in line with the original allocations that people had been set previously at a CCG level. So again, we've maintained that link. The other critical thing, I think, on a technical basis that's worth noting, I talked earlier about the Financial Recovery Fund, which is provided to trusts where they need financial support to get to into a balanced position. That's changed slightly this year in that, there's only one fund. So this year where we had PSF and FRF, we've only got FRF now. So I shan't bore you with the shenanigans around that, but we've got one fund. The other critical thing, though, is that 50% of that is now dependent on the individual organisation performance. The other 50% is on the system performance. So if one organisation balances but another one doesn't, then there's a hit to the system on that. And what that's really sort of emphasised is the change in the way that we need to work that we've already been doing anyway. And you look at what's happening in Croydon, the conversations I've just had around Sutton and Surrey Downs and Epsom St Helier, that really just pushes further the work that we need to do. That we work as a system and we're all seen as one family in all of that, and that's where we're working through on the finances at the moment. So it's still borough focused. It needs to incorporate the provider positions, and clearly it needs to incorporate all the South West London work that we're doing as well. Personally, I think it's the right way to do it. It sets us a new set of challenges in terms of how we work as organisations, how we get our people to work in organisations. And again, that was mentioned in the culture and OD piece that Matthew mentioned earlier when we were talking about how the CCG needs to work differently. So I think we're making good progress on that. Notwithstanding, it's a challenging position. The Financial Recovery Fund that's been given is less than we had last year, so that sets a challenge for the trusts. We know we've already got the sort of market forces factor reduction in our assumptions, and clearly, you know, as Jonathan said out in there's a number of expectations against the long-term plan, whether it be mental health investment standard, 92% bed occupancy, and all those sorts of things. That gives us a financial challenge. So we're not where we need to be yet at the moment in terms of the original draft, but we're making good progress. We are working in a much better way, I think, and will continue to do so ahead of the contract sign-off at the end of March and the plan submission at the end of April. The one technical thing, really technical, which we will need to do is clearly we're a new organisation. We'll have to sign off a budget. So we'll discuss that at the March committee in common, but we will have a finance committee in April, which will need to sign off what the budget is and then bring that to the governing body. So we'll give an update to the committee in common in March, bring that to the finance committee, and then bring that to the governing body.
Sorry, can you be clear, James, which committee in common you're talking about?
Sorry, the finance committee in common, sorry. There's only one committee in common for me, the finance committee in common. So that's the process, but we just need to be aware of that because clearly we'll need to tick all the audit boxes when we go through. We wouldn't want to start off with a black mark on signing off a budget. Happy to take any questions on that. Sorry.
Excellent, thank you both. And I know there's a huge amount of work behind your summaries. James.
just really wanted to build on Jonathan's point around outpatient transformation. So, because I think this is quite an interesting area, and we'll tease out a number of issues really in terms of both the move to a South West London CCG and the move to an ICS way of working. The aspiration in the long-term plan is that over the life of the LTP, that face-to-face outpatient appointments will reduce by 30%, and we're being asked to show measurable progress towards that this year. Now, there is aspiration in all of our local place-based plans towards that. We are in the early stages of some work with the Health Innovation Network, looking at how we can look again at our approach in terms of, I think, two issues. The first is the challenges that outpatient transformation presents around releasing cost and efficiency from the system, because traditionally this has been an area that has played through the tariff that we used to use in a particular way. So there's real challenges in terms of releasing cost when you change the way of delivery, but also how we retain the local flexibility and the focus on place, but also make best use of our transformation resources across South West London, because we know that although there is a local context, there are a number of areas where we're all working on roughly the same areas of place. So we are doing some work with the HIN to help us play through that approach, and it's got the support and involvement of place-based leads, but I think it's something that we're going to want to come back and have a focus on, because there is a high national profile for it, and it is a real challenge in terms of the transformation approach.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Matthew?
Yeah, so I think James's comment that things were, people were working together, there's system-wide conversations going on, is absolutely valid. I'm participating in many of those, and I think it's absolutely accurate. I think it is, however, important to note that 2021 looks really challenging in terms of where we are at this point and where we need to get to. Now, we're still in the early part of March, and there's still a bit of time to run through, but I don't think the governing body should be unaware of the scale of the challenge and risks that individual places are holding, or indeed that South West London as a whole is. Now, we're not alone in that. In fact, we're probably not in the most challenging position comparatively either, but the bottom line is we're in a situation in the early part of March that we're not quite where we need to be for the new financial year from a financial perspective. And I think it's important to verbalise that and note it here, and cognizant of the fact there's a whole load of work going on to address it, but I think it would be wrong to just leave it as the places are all working together well and it's all ticking along, which is not what James said, but people might misread that, and I thought it important to just flag the fact that there's considerable challenge that we're all working on.
Thank you. Anything else? No. So, thank you very much for the update on that. So that brings to an end the items that we've got to cover on the agenda. I've just got some time now for public questions, if there are any. We haven't been submitted, we haven't had any questions submitted in advance of the meeting, but I just wanted to open it up and give an opportunity for any of the members of the public present to ask a question. Anita, and welcome.
Thank you. I think it's just an observation. I'll always have a scrutiny hat on whenever I go about my business in terms of looking at overall strategy and decision making. And I think just drawing on your comments there about process control, I thought was quite key, because I think if you highlight some of the planning guidance and key areas moving forward, I think my sort of comment was around areas of challenge and in the new way that you'll be working. And I'll always have a mental health hat on about in terms of treatment times, from referral to treatment waiting times. And I think I could see that was a challenge that perhaps other areas across South West London have at the moment as well, not just Kingston. But obviously just drawing on the work that health overview panel has done recently with Tonya, and the comprehensive report that we did on IAP services and how that factors into alleviating some of the pressures at Kingston Hospital and so on, and people are, presenting themselves at hospital, how best to support people in the community. My observation really was about looking at causal factors across South West London that can give you sufficient data and understanding to help in terms of how you mitigate risk. So I'd be interested to know moving forward how you look at setting priorities, how you look at risk across South West London in terms of how you set your emotion, your change and transformation. Sometimes it might not be so obvious to individuals like myself who are perhaps in layman terms non-experts, and looking at the clinical factors that are in play, whether there's variances across South West London that can give you a better idea moving forward about where the key risks are. So in terms of looking at the financial breakdown, I'd be interested to know sort of in the amber and red performance indicators, what is it that determines where those risks are? Is it about staff retention? Is it about quality? Increasing, I've put here certain age-related illnesses perhaps, are there trends? Increasing the take-up at primary care level. And I think that's what we alluded to at Kingston, that there are the initiatives at primary care to look at prevention and early intervention. So I think something that aligns that with how you look at risk would be very interesting moving forward. So, and bearing in mind the mental health capacity as well within that, I'd be interested to know how you would align risk with your strategy moving forward. It's sort of an overall comment really for future reference, but I think that might be helpful in terms of oversight, certainly for the role I have. How you'd go about doing that would be very helpful. Thank you very much.
So thank you
That's
very much.
rather detailed, but thank you.
Thank you, Anita. And maybe let me just start by answering part of that. So I think a part of your question was around priority setting and how we decide what action we're taking and where we're putting our energy. Probably I can talk from the clinical input into that, the perspective of the clinical Senate that we have at South West London. So I think our focus as a clinical Senate has been more around priorities for service transformation. So we have been working on looking at data across South West London, and not just data in terms of performance data, but benchmarking data and national pieces of work that have been done to highlight areas for us where we perhaps have greater variation in clinical standards and outcomes. So we did use that to inform quite a number of discussions with senior clinicians across South West London to help us shape our priorities. And we had a clinically led conference early last year where we went through a process around that in advance of the conference, and then tested that with a broad range of clinicians from across South West London. So we came up with 6 clinical transformation priorities for South West London, which we're now working on. So that's one part of it. I think the other part of your question, though, is around operational priorities. How do we, in year, respond to need, to emerging risks, to data, and then prioritise the action we take? And clearly the way we work now, there is clinical input into that, but probably the answer to that is better given by you, Sarah.
So I think what we have to be careful of is how much data and how much detail we can do at a South West London level, but recognising all the work that's going on across South West London. So one example would be urgent emergency care, which is obviously one of our high risks. So we have work that goes on at South West London level where we have an urgent emergency care board, where we have people from across the systems in South West London coming together, identifying risks and themes and what we might do together in order to improve services. But they reflect local systems who also work with the real detail around what's actually happening in each A&E department, in each community, working with local authorities, working with others to actually identify the real detail behind what's happening locally, what are the risks and how we might respond to that. So I think what we will need to get right at South West London CCG is how do we take that information and look at an appropriate level of data that helps us to understand what's going on in our systems, but doesn't do the detail and decision making for them, because it's important that our systems are autonomous in their delivery and their decision making around what the priorities are for them. So I think we have to get that right. I'm not suggesting we've got that right through this process. I thought our performance report starts to take us there, and I think it is a good report, gives us a lot of detail of where we are. We do use a lot of tools such as root cause analysis. We do look at the statistics across the piece, and we have got a lot of that available to us, and what we will need to do at South West London level is get that level of data right. But I think it's very helpful, but we do deep dives as well, and I think throughout the year what we will need to do is where we have areas where we have high risk or we are concerned about at South West London level, we'll want to do some deep dives on those areas just to make sure that we understand what's going on both at a South West London level and at a local level. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm happy to talk about it afterwards.
Yes, hello. Could you possibly just introduce yourself and what capacity you're here at?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Tom Pollock. I'm a patient in Wandsworth. I was at the last meeting yesterday of the Wandsworth CCG. I've just completed 6 years as a public governor at Chelsea and Westminster NHS Foundation Trust, and I'm sure you're aware Chelsea and Westminster is a high-performing trust and one that some of the hospitals in this patch could take some benefit from their example. What I wanted to ask was in the paper on assisted conception treatments, which obviously is to be welcomed because you're making it consistent across the 6 CCG areas as they are. There are no costings from what I can see, and I wondered whether there were any information on the financial implications of the decision. Because clearly, as the finance report indicates, there are financial pressures and the patch is under enormous pressure to make sure that it tries to stay in the black. So I'm wondering whether there are any costings. I think the one area which is being added to the list is Croydon. I think the others are carrying on what they've done before. While I'm on my feet, perhaps I can ask some further questions. I did raise the point with James yesterday about the decision to rotate the meetings across the 6 patches, and one of the reasons why I raised it was because getting to a location like this from, say, Croydon, and you should be encouraging people to use public transport, is somewhat difficult. And there are some locations which are easier to get to from all 6 commissioners, and others which are difficult. And I'm told that that was a decision of the shadow group, but I think maybe after a period of time that should be looked at in terms of what the support from the public is. Also, I'm looking at the nameplates, and unless I had a telescope, I wouldn't be able to read them. And I wonder, the whole benefit of the nameplates is so that people like me can identify who people are. And if I can't read them, there's no point in having them. So I'm wondering whether there can be some thought to redesigning them, increasing them significantly in size, or finding some other way of making it possible for me sitting here and other members of the public knowing who is who. I was concerned to hear the suggestion, if I understood it correctly from the convener, that some of the financial information that is available here at future meetings should be maybe limited, because there's a significant amount of financial information here, and this is the only place where members of the public can see what is actually going on. The local committees are not public meetings, and obviously the local committees will be discussing financial matters relating to their particular areas. But I think it's very important, if this organisation is going to be transparent and accountable, that adequate financial information is made available. Thank you.
Okay. So let me cover off a few of those, and then I'll come to Jonathan on assisted conception, and perhaps finish with you, Sarah. So let me say something about the principle of rotation of location for the governing body meeting. So there's probably a separate question about where in each borough that meeting is held and making sure it's accessible. But I do think the principle of rotating through the 6 boroughs is quite an important thing for us to do, particularly in year 1, because of course a big part of what we've described for South West London is, I think as I said at the start, encouraging each borough to be successful and to thrive and to recognise the good practice that is going on in each borough and to learn from each borough. What I'm hoping is that when we hold a meeting in each borough, it's an opportunity for the borough to tell us about some areas of good practice, so that we can recognise that, celebrate it, but also learn from it. In the same way, it gives us an opportunity to get patient stories from each borough and to get some challenge from those as well. And I think we'd be missing out, really, if we just try and centralise all our South West London work. That's not the way we want to do it. But I do think there's a valid question about the accessibility of the locations we choose. Nameplates, we can definitely make them bigger, and I think we can commit to do that. I think David's comment on financial information was more about how do we present the information in a way that is accessible and that gives us what we need to see without drowning us in detail. That doesn't preclude us from putting a lot more information in appendices so that where people want to dive into the detail, they can do that. But I'm confident that the group is going to work on coming up with a format that does give us all the detail we need to understand the information, whilst making it clear the key messages that arise from that. Is that fair, David? Yeah, absolutely. So shall I come on to you, Jonathan, specifically around assisted conception? It kind of reflects the question that Dino had asked, I think, about financial implications of the changes, but perhaps you could just say a little bit more about that.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for the question, because I think it is a really important question. And as I said earlier in response to Dino, we have been trying to carefully balance our statutory financial duties with our responsibility to give access to services, and in this case, level up services across South West London. But to answer your question very directly, next year we expect across South West London, knowing what we know at the moment, to spend around £2.2 million on IVF services, and roughly it's about an increase of around £500,000, and nearly all of that is associated with the changes in the access for Croydon residents. So to give you a very, very honest and frank answer to that question, that's the implication of what we've set out.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I think I might have stolen your thunder there and answered that question. Okay. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you for those questions.
You didn't answer my question about the nameplates.
No, I did. Sorry, I probably didn't make that say that as clearly as I could. We absolutely can make the nameplates bigger, and we will do that.
The other question I should have raised was, when I'm old enough to remember when these meetings or the meetings of health bodies were secret, and when Frank Dobson opened them up to the public, and I think I'm going back to about 1997, when the NHS issued an advice paper as to what the body should do to help the public feel welcome. And one of the things that they suggested was that where you held the meetings, there were notices indicating where the meetings were. So that, for instance, coming here, if I was outside the meeting, there should be a notice to say that the South West London body is meeting where, and with arrows indicating the room.
Can I suggest, can we get some of our team to have a word with you straight after this meeting? Just because I think you've raised a number of really important points. Let's have a chat with you after the meeting and go through those things and see what we can learn from them, make sure we get it right for the next meeting and any subsequent meetings. So thank you for your input. Well, I'll get someone to have a chat with you straight after. So that brings us to the end. I've not been notified of any other business, so I will now formally draw the meeting to a close. Thank you, everybody.